My name is Georgia McManigal, and I'm going to tell you about my experience being in New York City on Tuesday, 9/11, that fateful day in our history. A little prelude to that, I arrived in Newark, New Jersey airport Thursday before that. It was just before sunset, and the sun was setting, and the golden glow on the Twin Towers was magnificent, and I watched it out of the airplane window. Then I stayed with relatives in New Jersey, and on Sunday they took me in to the elder hostel that I was going to be attending starting on Sunday, an elder hostel called Ethnic New York. And we had lunch on the docks of New Jersey right across from the Twin Towers. My brother-in-law had worked in the financial world and knew all about the various buildings and explained them and what went on in the Twin Towers, and of course I'd been in them years before. Then on Monday, my elder hostel group went to Ellis Island, passing directly under the Twin Towers on the way out to Ellis Island on the subway before we got on the ferry. And coming back from Ellis Island, we had an interesting experience. A big rain squall came up and obliterated the skyline of New York City as we approached it. And kind of an omen as I look back in a scary kind of a way. Now, to jump to actual date of 9/11. We were in the subway on the way to the Immigrant Museum, not far from the Twin Tower area, and our subway was stopped. We had to stop in the middle of stations, and we had to wait. They told us there was an emergency, something about an accident, a plane accident, and so we waited about half an hour in the subway. We were busy chatting, so it didn't worry us. Then they evacuated us at the nearest train station that they could get us. And as we emerged on 4th Street, about 10 to 12 blocks from where the towers had been standing, we had no idea anything had happened. We saw two big puffs of smoke in the air, and we thought there was a big fire. But we saw everybody looking from buildings, looking down south in that direction, and soon some people came running up the street, which in retrospect, they were running away from the collapse of the second tower that had happened about 20 minutes before. And as we were staring at these big puffs of smoke in the air, still not knowing what had happened, a man walked up to us and said, "They're gone." We said, What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, where you are looking, the Twin Towers stood until 20, 30 minutes ago." And that was the first inkling that we had of what had happened. And we were really quite close by then. So we couldn't go any place where we were going. Everything just stopped in New York City. It was totally quiet, no cars on the road or anything. And we were 4 miles away from our home in New York City, which was the YMCA on 63rd Street. We, of course, couldn't proceed with what we were doing, and they asked us to get back to the hotel. So we started walking back because there were no vehicles on the road at all. Once in a while an emergency vehicle, but no sirens. In the meantime, we really didn't know much at all, except that there had been an accident and the Twin Towers were no longer there, something involving airplanes. So our directors tried to get rides back to the YMCA for some of the people who really couldn't make it walking. He did find one taxi on the road and held him down and asked the person in the taxi to please share, and could these people get back to where they needed to go. Then we went on another ways to about 18th Street, and he saw a panel truck. And there were not many vehicles on the road, so it was kind of a miracle that came along. So the leader said, "I'm going to ask him if he'd take $200 if we could pile some people in the back of the truck." So we saw the leader ask the truck driver, and the truck driver shook his head. We thought, oh my. Instead, the leader came back and said, "All right, he'll take 7 people." He said no, and he shook his head because he said no, he wouldn't take any money. And that was the beginning of the wonderful things that people showed toward each other in this whole period of days that I was in New York City. I continued to lead a group and walk back to the hotel. We saw lines and lines of people moving north, trying to figure out how they were going to get home. There was nothing running, no transportation. In fact, it was rather amusing. As we came to streets to cross, we'd stop and wait for the stoplight, because out of habit, that's what we're trained to do. And we thought, this is silly. There's no vehicles. Why are we stopping? So we learned to just look carefully and proceed forward. But these lines were forming at McDonald's and Burger King to get people something to eat, and also for lines for the bathroom. People, not anybody pushing, shoving, shouting, crying, just somber and serene. It was very eerie. It was macabre, honestly, almost. As we progressed, we heard once in a while someone on a cell phone saying, honey, I'll be home. I don't know when, and I don't know how I'm getting home, but I'll figure it out, because of course nothing was running. People were walking across the bridges to get home. We began to get little inklings from radios that people had on, because electricity was off in a lot of places. People had portable radios, and we could hear the little bits, and the story began to unfold. But then when we got to Times Square, we saw the little news ribbon that runs along the building and began to get a bigger picture of what had happened. But it was a hot day, and it was about noon, and we kept moving on until we got to 63rd Street to our YMCA. We'd walked 4 miles, and were just very relieved to get home, but didn't feel tired because there was so much adrenaline going in a very quiet way in your body. Later that afternoon, we took a walk. We turned on TV immediately, of course, and began to get more facts and watch TV almost constantly. But that afternoon, we couldn't stay cooped up any longer, so we went walking on Amsterdam Avenue and saw a long line of people. And we walked to the front of the line and said, what's all this about? Well, it was people waiting to give blood, which of course, sadly, was never needed. But people rose to the occasion and just came out of the woodwork to help. But meantime, everything stopped. The theaters were closed. People couldn't get on and off the island. Transportation wasn't there. The food was beginning to run out in a few days where we were staying and in other restaurants, because food could not get off. The workers were housed in whatever rooms were available because they couldn't get off on subways to get home. And people couldn't get in to be in place. So it was a real stymied time. We finally found a movie theater that was open on Wednesday night. And then on Thursday night, they had another scare, and planes were going to start to fly again, and they stopped the flying again. And I decided I needed to, instead of going to Prince Edward Island on airfares that I'd worked very hard to get, and routes up through Montreal to Prince Edward Island on that Saturday following, I needed to get on the phone and get an Amtrak train home to California. There was just no transportation available, no buses. People were renting cars, people were even buying cars. There was just no way to get out of New York City and home. So on Friday morning, I got on the phone and made a reservation on an Amtrak train on Sunday to California. But we had to go to Penn Station to pick up our ticket. So I went to Penn Station in taxi, got out, and was mobbed because everybody waiting for a way to get out of New York City or to get home from all over the world. But it was a very, very quiet crowd. Nobody pushed, nobody jostled, nobody wanted to get to the front of the line. It was very eerie, and it was very quiet. And all of a sudden, everything got even more quiet. And from the back of the station, we heard clapping started and proceeded toward us, and everybody separated, and along came a whole battalion of firefighters from someplace out of New York City, covered with dust and ashes, going to a train. And let me tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in Penn Station. I did get my ticket, and I couldn't go till Sunday, and this was Friday morning, but the YMCA said we could stay because we could have rooms, because nobody was coming in to fill any rooms that we would vacate. I did get to a play in Mikado, and before they started, they brought the whole crew backstage, and actors and everything on stage with a big American flag, and did the national anthem. And again, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And the night before, the Juilliard School of Music had opened their black box, and quite famous artists came and played music gratis if we would give a donation to the Red Cross. They were just wonderful humanitarian things happening all the time. That's it.